Disclaimer: the content provided in this podcast is for informational and entertainment purposes only. While we discuss topics related to mental health advice, life wisdom, and alike, the opinions expressed are personal views of the hosts and do not constitute professional, legal, or medical advice. We make no representations or warranties about the accuracy or completeness of the information discussed. Any action you take based on the information in this podcast is strictly at your own risk, and we are not liable for any losses or damages in connection with its use. Additionally, this podcast may contain discussions around addictions, substances, which are intended for adult audiences. We do not endorse any illegal activities. Please consult your local laws before engaging in any actions related to this content. By listening to this podcast, you agree that you are over the age of 18 or the age of majority in your jurisdiction and understand the terms of this disclaimer.
Welcome to the Balancing Forces podcast, where two opposites collide in the best way possible. One brings the fire,
the other keeps it chill.
But together we share life's lessons, hard-earned wisdom,
advice you can actually use.
Whether you need a fresh perspective or just a laugh, we're here to elevate your mind. So buckle up, because things are about to get real and
really funny.
All right, so tonight we are working on There Is a Hole in My Love Cup. I found this book online here on TikTok. This guy, his name is Sven Erlandson. He's a phenomenal badass counselor, author. So I found his book. I've been working through it, and I have decided that I wanted to start a series working through this book with you and everybody else in the world. Just because I know things are tight right now. Things, nobody's got money to go out and spend on a book right now, but they really want to work on themselves. And since I have the book, I want to help people work on themselves while they work on myself. So, we are going to do this probably, I don't know, maybe chapter by chapter, because there's some journal prompts, there's song recommendations throughout the book, all that sort of stuff. So I will be posting this up on Facebook, or not on Facebook, on fucking YouTube when we're done recording it. Yay! The new logo. All right, so There's a Hole in My Love Cup. The Core, Chapter 1. Therapy just doesn't work for me. So, there's a story I was told several times as a kid. It's the story of a man who lived his entire life in a forest in a valley between giant mountain ranges. Deep into those woods was his small cottage. There was a heavy wooden door, canopy of the high treetops and high mountains, forever shrouding his home and vast environs in darkness, always darkness. He would venture out of his hermitage each day, dressed in his big overcoat, whether to chop wood for fire, kill an animal to eat, or just to work this quiet, dark life he had carved out for himself. Some days his wanderings weren't far, some days quite far. On one particular day, his hunt took him far from his cottage, farther than he had ever been. After a full morning of walking and stalking animals, he laid himself down to rest before commencing his return. As he slept, the strangest thing happened, and altogether a new sensation took over his body. He awoke from his slumber to find it very bright. There was, it seemed, an opening in the canopy of the forest, and a break in the mountain range beyond it, and through it came something he had never experienced before, a light as bright and warm as the very fires he would gather wood to create. It stayed for only a brief period of time, but the brightness and the warmth were completely new and bewildering. He liked it, but simultaneously was somewhat afraid, as it was something he had never experienced before in his life. He returned home that afternoon, all the while thinking about that particular yet wonderful experience he had just had. In fact, that experience rather consumed his thoughts for a great many days to come. So much so that he finally resolved to go back, and so he did. One day, then again another day, each time growing more fond of the brief brightness and heat. Yet one day, so mesmerized was he by the experience, he resolved to bring with him extra food and a blanket so that he might walk farther, perhaps discovering more of this brightness and warmth, prepared to stay the night if necessary. Find it he did. The following day he discovered an open field covered in only tall wild grass. For the first time in his life he encountered something other than the dense dark forest. Open space. And as he gazed up into wonderment at not only the full sky but 2 mountain ranges of his valley, he noticed the light moving across one of the ranges, slowly, making the sky brighter, warming the air. He watched with bated breath as this first dawning of light swept across his entire landscape, and colors seemed to spring into life. He removed his overcoat, as its heat was no longer necessary. Before long, the light had not only run over him and warmed his body and face completely, but became so bright that he had to shield his eyes. The whole experience was the most glorious thing he'd ever felt. And there, in the grasses, he felt he fell into a new deep slumber as he'd never experienced before. However, he knew he could not stay long. He had not brought provisions for 2 nights' stay, and he missed the safety of his tiny dark cottage. So after his warm nap, he walked back to the edge of the forest, and with one last backward glance at the marvel of it all, he ducked back into the wood and began his long trek back to his cottage deep inside the canopy of the dark forest. It was an arduous journey to be done in one day, and his overcoat seemed to be hotter and heavier than normal, even unnecessary, having been heated by the light. But stoked by a head full of new thoughts and even more questions, it was as if time did not exist. He was home before he knew it. Opening the thick, solid front door, he gazed inside to his familiar everything, and for the first time in his life had the sensation of how small his home really was. The table he had hewn as a boy, the chair, the rug he had waved on with his own hands, all of it was warm in its own way, but small, tight even. For many days after, as he worked or hunted or ate his meals in silence, his mind forever returned to the field, the soaring mountains, the absence of darkness, and that mesmerizing, warm, even hot light. Knowing he had to return and experience it again, and confident that he could do it in a day, now that he knew the way, he planned his trip. Just a day's provisions and a lighter coat so that he might move quicker, particularly on his return, and departed he did, leaving very early, arriving earlier than last time, staying slightly longer, and as last time, arriving to the door of his little cottage, even hitting his head on the top of the frame as he entered. That's odd. I've never done that before, he thought. While his new cottage was not exactly shrunk, except in his perception, he realized it could only have happened because he was quite strangely standing taller, upright. Odd. And this began his journeys. His day treks started earlier and earlier. His departure from the open field and its light got later and later, till one time the brightness had actually begun to slide past the other mountain range. That one was a more difficult hump back to the cottage. While energized by the light, it was also a very long day. But he made it. Yet again, for seemingly the 100th time, he hit his head as he entered his ever littler home. Eventually, he started bringing 2-day provisions so that he could overnight near the field, just inside the canopy of the forest, as the safety of the woods was all he ever knew. He would spend 2 days in the light and then return. 2 days became 4. After he had erected a lean-to at the edge of the woods, now part in the woods and part in the field, and before long he had brought his hunting pieces in a basket for gathering the richest berries and seeds, which he had found on the yonder side of the field. And one day, as he lay in his makeshift grassy bed, clothed in the warmth and the radiance of the light alone, he had the most startling epiphany. He realized he had everything. More, he realized there was nothing, not one thing, except sheer familiarity, left to draw him back to his hermitage. There was simply nothing he wanted any more that small yet familiar past home held for him. He had not only found a new home, but a new life and a whole new body of experiences. So for the last time, he took what had become a very, very long walk back to the cottage. For the next day or two, he assembled the 1 or 2 things left in his food stores, but everything else, the chair, the table, the rug, well, or they were the past, and he knew it. The next morning, he slept in, woke, ate, dressed lightly, placing his old overcoat on the bed, made sure the fireplace was completely wet, and walked out, closing the old wooden door behind him, running his hand over its dark lumber, and with a smile he turned and left, never to set eyes upon this tiny house again. Never, ever again. That day his new life fully and finally began. Living in the light. This is the journey from darkness to light. This is what it is to finally come alive in this lifetime. Done rightly, this movement from a life of darkness to one of light is what the therapy experience is supposed to be. Whether it comes at the hands of a psychologist, a priest, pastor, a gifted friend, or some other source of wise counsel, this movement from dark, small, and hidden to open, warm, and bright, and fully alive is the goal of introspection, courage, and a life lived deliberately. Unfortunately, there seems to be a dearth of people, whether professional or lay, who possess both the personal experiences and the capacity to transform others necessary to facilitate movement from darkness to light. Yet, this is very much what is most needed. This is indeed the great longing in our society, the longing to live in the light and to have people who actually possess the ability to help us get there, who know the journey of the dark forest, who can come back in and help us get out, who can, in short, set our soul free, who can take us from pain and darkness to joy, peace, and light. I believe this is spirit work, not as normally construed by those typically charged with tending spiritual matters, i.e., religion. I believe what is most necessary for the liberation of so many caught in the darkness of unhappiness and even misery, despite all the possession accoutrements of supposed happiness in America. It is the deepest inner work of the soul. If there is one thing I have learned as a spiritual counselor for 25 years, speaking and lecturing at the graduate and undergraduate levels in the field of spirituality and sociology of religion, if there is one thing I've learned as the son of two spiritual leaders, one pastor, one seminary professor, the nephew of 4 clergy uncles, and the grandson of a woman who told her country pastor, her country pastor to stick it and started her own church in the 1940s, if there is one thing I have learned as a man who has committed his life to his own spiritual journey and facilitating the spiritual growth of others, is this: life is fair, very, very fair. Despite the necessary ubiquitous belief to the contrary, despite the incessant life's not fair caterwauling of so many people who haven't won some life lottery yet, the old spiritual maxim rings true. The rain falls on the just and the unjust, the rich and the poor, the old and the young. Specifically, life is unflinchingly fair when it comes to pain. No one escapes life without pain, without suffering, without anxiety and emptiness of the soul. No one gets through life without some form of spiritual depression. No one goes unscathed. No one. Back on point. Pain is what unites us all. That sounds a bit morbid, perhaps, but it's not. It's just truth. And it is that unity in pain that binds us, that brings out our compassion for each other, and that galvanizes human endeavors towards the same goal: to be loved and to be happy, to fight together the ugly animal of pain, and her brother, the fear of pain, seeking to pull us down into despair and deadness of the soul. So if that be true, then the real challenge of life is getting from pain to love and happiness. Getting there. Tragically, the elements of society that have grown up over time to meet or, at the very least, assuage the spiritual longing inside have largely failed us. Religion has fallen out of esteem and become inept for a great many people, even many of the religious themselves. I'm a former pastor and know what religion, done well, is capable of, but it has fallen into such a sad state of disrepair in America, and psychology, whose business is internal pain, and which I also have respect for, continues to disappoint a lot of people. And so the longing and emptiness persist from one day into the next, year after tumbling year. What I'm getting at, and what really needs to be spoken for us to start together on a solid base in our spiritual work together, is that, if we are completely honest, for a great many of us, there is no healing, no path to the light. There is nothing, it seems, that really makes the numbness and unhappiness of life go away permanently. There are quick fixes and mild things that paper over the gnawing unhappiness, but there is no permanent fix, or so it feels. Whether it's the confessional booth or a pastor's study of your local church, or whether it's the office of your marriage and family counselor or your psychologist, for a great many people, therapy just doesn't hit the nail. This means we have a country full of people who are not making the transition from fear to happy and from pain to love, both outside and inside. You're stumbling through life hurting on the inside, fumbling relationships and careers, running from the tidal waves of emotions, staying as busy as you can. You keep struggling for control of life. You've created a great illusion on the outside: good career, good family, good kids, good title, good spouse, and good financial picture. Even perhaps it's not just good, but great. All of your willpower and control have made a life that looks very presentable on the outside, but your illusion of control stops at your skin. Once the story moves inside, everything is out of control, isn't it? You've reached out to friends, to clergy perhaps, and of course to therapists, perhaps several therapists. Or maybe, like many of most of my successful clients, you've reached out to no one, but just kept running from it, denying it, or stuffing it down. Yet nothing helps, or you're sick of running. Tiny gains are regularly outweighed by massive frustrations, not to mention the loss of money, time, and energy from ineffective therapy. And all the while, your ever-turning mind rages on and on with confusion, self-doubt, longing to know your true self, self-loathing, and brief spurts of willpower and that later get bogged down by lethargy, anger, or just plain exhaustion. A hearty mix of anxiety and depression, in one form or another, rule your life, even when you're able to keep them well hidden, even when you stay medicated or self-medicated. You're just a hair's breadth away from losing it at any moment, aren't you? And nothing seems to help, especially the one thing that is supposed to make this very unhappy, sorry, and nothing seems to help, especially the one thing that is supposed to make this very unhappiness go away: therapy. Some people have good experiences in therapy, but sadly, a great many people don't. And so you're left feeling stuck. You can't get yourself out of your own problems, and you can't seem to find anybody who can help you. There are countless reasons it may not work for you. For example, if you're a guy, therapy stinks because it feels like therapists have it in for you before you even walk in the door. Heck, therapy as a profession, as well as science and society, are convinced that men are utterly devoid of feelings, less developed emotionally, and purely incapable of expressing feelings, all of which are asinine beliefs, patently untrue. If anything, I found men often to be my most honest, open, and highly sensitive clients, if and only if they have a therapist they both trust and respect. How many times have you heard that girls develop emotionally faster than boys, and men don't express their feelings well? Such condescending beliefs have become this giant cultural myth. So you're deemed an emotional invalid before the first conversation even starts, and are forever dogged by the feelings that you are looked down upon. Or, if that's not always the case, the industry is so rampant with belief systems that the men are quite reasonably skeptical of the field, thereby unwilling or unable to conjure the trust upon which great therapy is predicated. Perhaps you're a woman for whom therapy stinks because you get 8 to 10 sessions into it, telling your life story and revealing all your pain before you realize your psychologist blows, because she has nothing original. She has no deep insights, no challenging questions with which to push you and encourage growth, nothing to contribute at all. You realize you're paying someone to do nothing but sit back and listen to you, as if you're able to self-direct your therapy, failing to realize that if you knew how to fix your doggone self, you wouldn't be seeing a therapist to begin with. And what's worse is that when you leave the therapist and move on to the next therapist who was recommended by some friend, only to discover 8 to 10 sessions in that this one isn't even an ounce better than the last one, and so you're stuck in this ugly, wasteful, frustrating chapter upon chapter of spilling your guts and getting nowhere. Or, almost worse than that, you stay in a counseling relationship that isn't getting you anywhere, and you know it isn't getting you anywhere, but you stay because it's familiar and it's safe, never pushing you very hard out of your comfort zone, yet allowing you to live in the illusion that you are actually doing something to solve your life problems. Perhaps you are withholding large chunks of truth from your therapist, fearing what she will think of you, fearing the ramifications of admitting your truth, or fearing the seemingly great unknown if you were to really start opening up. Worse still, and it is far more common than you'd think, a great many folk actually flat out lie to their therapists. Yes, they pay someone to help them, but then give disinformation, preferring to stay deeply rooted in their own inertia and fears. And sadly, most therapists have no idea how to break through the lies and the fear that keep people from opening up. But interestingly, the real problem isn't just that you dislike therapy, or maybe you like it but are very, very discontent with the whole thing. The real problem is that therapy so often doesn't work. Let's be clear. If your therapist actually powerfully and permanently worked, you likely wouldn't be reading this book. There would be no need. And so in the end, what this really means is that you're just craving something that can actually fully finally help you, right? I mean, isn't that what you really want? More than anything, to be over the crud that you know is there in you and in your life? Isn't that what you really want to be healed? Finally and definitively? Isn't it what you really want to know? Peace, no purpose, no truth, clarity of life, and to know actual happiness when you wake up in the morning? Well, I'm here to tell you it's not only possible, it's quite doable and doable quickly. But it means going into some heavy stuff. Perhaps that very stuff you've been avoiding your entire life. You know, the stuff that you've been running from. Because until you look at it, sit in it, and deal with the real stuff of your past and your life and your fears, you ain't ever going anywhere. Ignore the double negatives throughout the book. You get the point. You're going to stay stuck, making new iterations of the same problem for years, for decades, and you'll get into your 50s, 60s, and 70s with nothing more than resigned regret. And the truth is, you don't want to do that, do you? Of course not. You want life. You want to finally feel alive. Not just once, not just till the weekly therapy session wears off, but daily, permanently. Badass counseling. My method, Badass Counseling, is the rather organic results of my belief that I could do it better. Decades ago, having been raised by a family of spiritual leaders who succeeded, failed, and succeeded many times over, I began to explore what would need to happen to create highly effective spiritual counsel and leadership. This requires going deep into my own spiritual crud, where all good spiritual journeys start, wrestling with it, clearing it out, and beginning to craft spiritual solutions from the soil up. My method is nearly 3 decades of work condensed into a very tight, very fast, very overwhelming, and very effective technique for taking very highly successful individuals, couples, families, and even organizations and groups from pain to happiness. Spirituality, athleticism, creativity, and academic traditions, and a big old dose of fire, violence of the soul, and hard work. The rain falls on the unjust and the just. We all do suffer in life. Pain is integral to life as sunshine and water. Most people make the mistake of running from it rather than into it. But I come from athletics and military, where the most difficult, painful, violent, challenging, failure-filled workouts yield the greatest fruit. Over the past 25 years, weaving that military and athletics past into my lifetime of religion and spirituality as a pastor's kids and later a pastor myself, I radically changed my understanding of God. When I was an NCAA head coach for strength, my teams would come into gym. When I was an NCAA head coach for strength, my teams would come into my gym for the express purpose of being made stronger, faster, bigger, and most importantly, mentally tougher. But muscle growth and mental growth does not occur during the workout. Muscles are essentially torn down during the workout. Muscle growth occurs in the periods of rest after the workout. But if the athlete, whether novice or professional, is not first taken to failure, fatigue, and extreme hardship, the athlete will not ever become stronger, faster, meaner, and bigger. Ever. Muscle growth is 100% dependent on becoming torn down first. Somewhere in the past 20 years, I had the epiphany that is exactly how God works. Thanks to the research of Joseph Campbell, we know that one of the meta themes extending across nearly all religions and sacred scriptures, past or present, is this notion that the gods send trials, not as punishment, but as strengthening agents, particularly in the Judeo-Christian gospel and history. There is an abundance of evidence that God uses bad to create good. It's not just that God redeems bad created by humanity, but actually sends it for the upbuilding of humanity. One need look no further than the central Christian story. God sent his son, knowing full well in advance that the boy would suffer and die, so that humanity would forever have new life. God uses supposed bad to create good. The things we perceive to be painful are meant for our growth and strength, so that we may further become instruments of God's love in the world. Just as my athletes would hate me at the end of their workouts, and you likely hate your trainer or coach at the end of the leg day. We at times hate God, or at least hate what we perceive to be God's recriminations and scorching of our lives. God is effectively the great coach in the sky, so to speak. Everything, even perceived pain, is for your growth. Everything. This is why so much therapy, whether psychological or spiritual, or even life coaching, yoga, and energy healing, just isn't that effective. Either it fails to go deep enough into the root sources of the individual's pain, which are usually found in childhood, or it seeks only to release the physical and emotional pain associated with the initial wounding. But the point of the soul isn't the pain you've experienced, but what that experience taught you about yourself. It's not enough to release the pain. It is to ask the pain what it was sent, either by the universe, God, or your own soul, to teach you about yourself and about your life. The purpose of going into the crud from your past is also to discern the effect of those negative experiences had on your core belief systems about yourself. And very, very few people can do that work on their own, unguided by a teacher. One of those purposes of the book is to both purge your pain and help you discern what that pain has been attempting to teach you. Your problem, or one of them, is simply that you've been framing pain wrongly. You've been incorrectly taught that the pain of your life was either completely random, bad luck, if you will, as if completely outside of the scope of God and God's power, your fault, or God's punishment, all of which are wrong. Whether you like it or not, everything is to make you stronger and wiser, and the sooner you see it as such, the sooner you stop running from the pain and start asking the pain and the gods in what ways this hardship is the greatest blessing of your life. The sooner you become a more powerful and a more compassionate agent of God's love in the world. God is love and a loving God. Unfortunately, far, far too many lay people, pastors, and theologians make the grand mistake of wanting loving God to mean a nice God. People repeat the ridiculous and ill-begotten nonsense. God doesn't send pain, or God would never hurt humanity or me. But there is no biblical precedence for such thinking. Heck, there ain't nowhere in any religion scripture where God is pitched as nice. Just like the great coaches in any sport, God kicks our butts to strengthen it. And sometimes that ass whooping doesn't feel nice and it even hurts. Those who've sought to dispel the maximum no pain, no gain in athletic world would be quite uncomfortable and out of sorts with honest spirituality. God ain't nice and God never was, and loving never meant always nice. What feels like the incessant pain of life is God forever attempting to grow you, push you, challenge you, knock you around, rattle you, and shred you, all for pruning your growth, your depth, your strength, and the long-lasting oxytocin release of true peace. And you've been running from it. You've been running from the greatest instrument of your growth, the greatest conduit to your happiness, like a lazy man or a coward runs from a hard workout or avoids the gym. My work is with those who are looking for something different, for those whom regular counseling, religion, and psychology just doesn't work, those who feel marginalized by the process, and those individuals who aren't just having problems in their head, but whose souls are hurting, who have pain and emptiness inside. My work is like the hardest leg day in the gym. It is painful, especially in the beginning, but immensely fruitful after the crud and the pain are cleared away. And lastly, my work is with the people who are looking for a counselor who is, on a personal level, a different animal, not your average counselor type, not your average spiritual type. For again, any good counsel grows out of the woman or man herself, who she is, where she has been, the dragon she has slayed, and the wisdom she has mined from her suffering. It's a bit of that when Harry meets Sally one-liner, I'll have what she's having. People want the peace, the power, purpose, and happiness they see lived in the life of the great counselor. Would you take investment advice from someone ever poorer than you? Training advice from someone ever weaker or slower than you? So why, for the love of God, would you take soul advice and life counsel from someone whose message is canned from a book and clearly not implemented in the person's life? So I'm asking you to take a ride with me. Trust me. Let me carry you. Do the stuff I tell you to do. Read the book and listen to the songs I tell you to. Meditate on what I lay before you. Hear my words, and above all else, have the courage to go into yourself and sit in that which you formerly run from. As you do this, begin to feel your truth. The goal is to begin to be, say, do, and become that which you truly are. Do not let the pain you have experienced become your reason for distrusting the universe, God, and soul's work, for everyone is suffering, not just you. Pain is universal. What you do with it, specifically what you let it teach you about your life and yourself, is what determines the trajectory of your life and the power of your communion with the spirit of the universe as it whispers to you from deep within your own soul. To finally become your truest self and find your greatest happiness, you must let go of the not so great life you've been holding on to. Not just the pain, but the fears and the craving for security above all else. You must allow the grasp of that which is merely familiar to release you and find and live in the light and the warmth. You must let go the neurotic longing for control. You must let you must let yourself fall into the arms of the universe. It is speaking to you from within, and always has. And life doesn't truly begin until you begin to listen to that quiet inner voice and trust it. Trust that what is leading you trust what it is leading you to. Trust what it is leading you away from. And trust that no matter what happens, you'll be okay. Once you have the courage to trust, you then have the courage to be, say, do, become, have, and believe that which you truly are. That's when everything changes and the stuff begins to fall out of the sky. Stuff you can't even begin to imagine. I've seen it daily, weekly, consistently, both in my own life and the lives of nearly all of my clients. I know it sounds hokey as heck, but I see magical, completely unexpected stuff happen in clients' lives as they clear the underbrush of the soul and begin to live their truth. Once you break through that wall, that is the fear of revealing who you really are to the world, amazing things begin to happen in the most unexpected and glorious ways. So here's a song recommendation. I'm not going to play it on the live or on podcast, but you can go and listen to it yourself. Throughout the course of this book, I will be offering songs for you to be listening to use as part of your reading and meditation process. This is heavy stuff and we're chewing on in this book, and sometimes getting the message through music has the effect of feeling them more deeply, experiencing them more profoundly, and engaging them more meaningfully. In that vein, I commend to your listening pleasure and spirit work the powerfully intense music and lyrics of Evanescence Bring Me to Life. So, journaling recommendation. All right, now we get into some really deep work. Take out a pad of paper and a pen and sit at your laptop, or perhaps even thumb type in the notes section of your cell phone. I'm a big believer in pen to paper, but call me old school. We're going to do some heavy journaling here. If you've never really journaled, great. If you have, terrific. Doesn't matter. What we're getting into isn't journaling about the color of the sky or how pretty the trees and the flowers are today. What we're journaling about is the real stuff going on inside of you, the stuff that you've been running from. Until you reach the state of lasting bliss, you ought to be journaling daily, heck, multiple times a day. The simplest way I have found to get my mind going when journaling is simply to write a question at the top of the page and then spend a page or 10 fleshing out my answers to that question. Just keep journaling until your mind and soul are empty, or until a new, deeper question comes up. Then go in the direction of answering that question, or even coming back to a question from days or weeks earlier. There are no right or wrong answers as long as you're just flushing out your feelings, not just your thoughts. Both. Just keep flushing it out of you. And there are certain default questions that you should always be coming back to, even if the question of the day were something completely different. Keep coming back to the questions. 1. What do I really, really feel about this, if I were to be totally honest? 2. Why? 3. What's really eating at me about the situation? 4. Why am I so angry, so sad, so afraid? 5. What's the single biggest and most powerful fear driving this whole equation? 6. Is there one person I'm having strong feelings about, and who? 7. What are those feelings? Anger, love, happiness, frustration, or disappointment? 8. How is this hardship or pain I'm experiencing the single greatest blessing that could have ever happened to me? What are the gods trying to teach me with this pain? What am I still not learning or still resisting that the ongoing pain keeps trying to get through to me? And then 9, in what ways am I feeling called to be an instrument of stronger love and compassion in the world? How has the past pain, the past workouts in the spiritual gym with the badass coach in the sky perfectly prepared me for the work ahead? So he says, but for today's questions at the top of your page, I want you to start with either of these few questions or just put each of the questions below at the top of a different page and simply journal and journal until you're done for this day or this moment. And then he's got the 4 questions that he wants you to work on today. So thanks for listening. Be sure to like, share, subscribe, leave a comment, share this out with your friends. At the end of the series, there will be a giveaway for a copy of your own book. Thank you.